Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Good to see everybody in person. Hello, 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 hello. Great to see you. We're back. We're back. Not to normal, but maybe getting there. Maybe getting there. Everybody at home, good to see you too. And welcome to your, I hope you're enjoying your coffee. We do have sacred cookies here, everybody. So if you came in high expectation that we would have sacred cookies, we do. They're all individually wrapped, and they're outside the door, which Daryl has just closed, but feel free to get some when we take our little pause in a minute. And many thanks to that fine gentleman right over there, Mr. Wayne V. Herbert, who brought all the individually wrapped sacred cookies. Yay, yay. Speaking of cookies and eating and drinking, etc., I want to let you know right up front that we are not going to have a happy hour yet, even though we've had many fun happy hours in the past. Not yet, but soon we'll be gathering together for a happy hour when we get it all worked out about doing that. So, you know, hold on that. The book group is still meeting. Hooray, George, who is not here. I'm looking for George. He always sits right here. But George tells me they're reading for June the book called Being Ram Dass. And those of you who are in the book group, I think you get a message on that for all the details. And you probably know that for July there's no book, but there are plans for a small social get-together. So I guess they're kind of kicking off a little bit of happy hour on their own. More to follow on that from George, including a break in August. For ordinary women, we have been meeting throughout the pandemic somewhat via Zoom, but we had our last meeting in May and we're on pause for the summer. However, we are doing some volunteer work with Boynton Church, our neighbor in the 3rd Ward, and in fact next Saturday we will be doing a food distribution at the pantry about 9 in the morning. If you haven't signed up and want to, please see Frida, who's in the lovely turquoise dress standing in the back. Do we need more volunteers, Frida? Oh, well, we're good, so that's okay. But we'll be doing it every month, June, July, and August for the summer and maybe even continuing throughout the year in case you want to volunteer. If you want more info on this, you can just holler at Frida. For those of you at home, send an email to Bill, sounds like. What do I know? All right, financial donations. For those of you at home, you know that you can donate on the website. But for those of us who are here, there are the brass plates in the back so you can put your well-earned money there as needed. And thank you very much for your generosity. You've all been so generous all the time. So good to see everybody here. Let me remind you or let you know that at 4 o'clock, Evensong will be done at St. Paul's in the church. It will be beautiful, beautiful if you want to go to it. A reminder for those in person that if you need to take a little break or slip out for a minute during the Ordinary Life session, don't walk down the middle of the aisle. That's the TV camera. So you would be right smack on TV. And lastly, just a reminder that we'll be back in person again next week, and we'll have the same procedure about registering and wear a mask and social distance if you feel comfortable with that, and if you feel comfortable not, then that's okay. Of course, we encourage vaccinations. Yes, Don? Huh? Yes? Don't worry, just come on and we'll sign you up in paper. Don't even worry about that. It's okay. Great to see you, Don. Yeah, don't we all? Anyway, great to see everybody again. We're going to take a 2-minute break, and you can go get another individually wrapped sacred cookie, and come on back here for Bill and Holly in just a minute.
I haven't done that in a while.
Boy, I am truly glad to see each and every one of you. Thank you. I've missed this the last 15 months. Our last time together in person here was March the 8th, 2020. And the next Sunday we went into lockdown, and I know we are all weary and worn by that time of physical distancing. The one word that I have tried to avoid all during this 15 months was the word unprecedented, because it got so overused. And early on, I had this deep intuition that another phrase to avoid using was when things get back to normal. Yeah. Because that's risky business. We'll talk more about that later today. I think this time has been harder on all of us than we can imagine. And we've been disoriented. We've been taken out of routines that have been familiar to us. I'm not simply talking about taking out routines about going to the grocery store and your favorite restaurant, but I've missed this more than I can say. And I have missed coming to the church to do my work, and which I'm going to resume in July. I mean, I'm working all the time, but coming back in the office. I miss walking around the halls and being a smart ass and showing magic tricks.
You still do that on
I still
Sunday.
do that on Zoom.
You're
Yeah, I
good.
do still do that. But I bet that happened to you too, that all of that. And, you know, we've all had days when we wondered, what day of the week is this? Mm-hmm. You know? At any rate, I'm glad you're here, and we need to get back into the habit of, no matter who you are, no matter where you are on your spiritual journey, welcome here. So here's some coronavirus cartoons. Quarantine Day, Quinty Nevin. And we've watched Netflix and made banana bread and all of that. So our history as a people has been disrupted. And because the virus and dealing with it became so politicized and so lied about, we as a country have begun to wonder what's true, what's reliable. The intensity of social media has caused a division in our country that has never been quite as serious as it is right now. I mentioned this in a sermon I gave here last week, but if you don't know who John Meacham is, either buy his book, The Soul of America, or watch his documentary on Amazon Prime. He is a historian specializing in presidential history. I really respect him. And he says that our country has not been in the position that it is in right now since right before the Civil War. It's a scary time. Last Sunday was the day before Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. And this series of cartoons appeared on the comic page. Mm. Can you see?
I can. Can you?
Yeah.
Okay, ready?
Yeah.
I'm so angry at your side.
Look at us. Look at you. All right.
Why can't you see what you're doing to this country?
Why can't you see what you're doing?
Oh my God, I can't even get through to you.
You didn't even try to listen to me.
I don't even want to live in a country ruled by you morons.
Tell me about it, jerk.
Think they died for this?
Nope.
We can probably do better.
So for some people, the requirement for physical distancing was virtually unbearable. During this past 15 months, we had dear friends die, as I'm sure you did too, some of you. And in more than one case, death came in isolation because loved ones were not permitted in the hospital room with the dying person. All those routines and rituals that mean much to us have been taken away, and we're just now beginning to get some of them back in place. We're just now beginning to do memorial services here at St. Paul's and very small weddings. So that sense of stability and comfort was taken away from us. In the beginning, because I am, as you can tell, a gadget guy. I really thought the novel of using electronic communication was cool. But believe me, that sheen wore off really, really quickly. And doing Zoom meetings is very demanding. And just to give you a hint, if I'm doing a counseling session and I want to take a note, it looks like I'm distracted and not paying attention. If that took place in my office, it wouldn't matter at all. There's a lot of room to get up and move around and doing all that sort of thing. And plus, since we couldn't get together as a clergy team, the 9 of us on the staff here, we had to record our parts for worship services individually at home, upload them to God so that Tim could, the cloud, same
I thought
thing.
you were calling Tim God for a second.
And then Tim could get access to them and splice them together.
Yeah.
We're still doing broadcast services, but that's going to come to an end pretty soon. We're going to do live stream, and this class will continue to be live streamed. It has been for a long time. So thank God for the technology that we had. 5 years ago, this would not have been possible. We could not have stayed connected 5 years ago. But we did what we did. And so without our usual routine, we did all sorts of things to keep from going crazy. Baking. Did you do your own sourdough starter?
Right.
My daughter did.
Yeah.
Gardening, sewing, painting, binging on Netflix, reading. These are the things that we did to try to keep us grounded. Some of us drank too much. Those were the things that we tried to do to numb out where we were. But nonetheless, the disconnection that occurred between us, our routines, our plans, has been profound. And I think it's going to take us a while to find out how to go forward, to regain what's been lost, to repair what's been broken, and to decide the answers that we individually and collectively want to give to the question, now what? What now? And though the power COVID has had over us is diminishing, I don't think we should lose sight that that's not true for everyone. I entered the question, where is COVID the worst right now, into my search engine, and saw that both we as a country and as a global community are far from out of the woods. And some of you have wondered, as I have, how are things going to be now that we can regather? And as I said, I don't think we know. We're going to be processing this for months. We've already decided today that probably is not a good idea
To have the pause.
to have a break so you can go get sacred cookies and then come back to this. So we're going to encourage you to have sacred
We
cookies.
didn't know either, Callista. It's
When you
okay.
first get here.
Yeah.
Thank you, Wayne and Callista, for the sacred cookies today. Thank you.
So I guess we'll get sacred cookie beforehand and then sit and then just stream right into. It also doesn't interrupt John's counting down for us.
Well,
We
we
can
could
just
be like a
continue to
dinner
live.
theater and have somebody just circulate in the crowd with a tray.
Who wants that? Adam's dressed in a jacket today. We could have you do that. Yeah. Hi.
Hi,
My turn.
I think so.
All right. For a lot of reasons, I need to see this screen so I know where I am.
You're in St. Paul's,
Well,
Fondren
thanks.
Hall.
Next to you. Ordinary life, although things don't feel so ordinary yet, or maybe this is ordinary. For a lot of reasons, including maybe that it's also the 20th commemoration of 9/11. I've thought a lot about 9/11 this year. I bet each of us has a story about where we were on that day, and we can remember the sights and the smells and the colors and who we were with. Richard Wingfield and I went and got coffee. Sometime, it was either that day or right after, just kind of staring blankly at each other, what just happened. And, you know, even though it's a wildly different event and we had no idea what was to come, I remember exactly where I was the day that it was announced that we're shutting down, that things are shutting down. I was in a restaurant with two friends. We were having a belated birthday celebration. And I had just gotten a text from Josh that said, we're in an emergency meeting. Seconds later, we're shutting school down. Then the robocalls start coming in from my kids' school. You know, this will be the last day of school for the next 2 weeks, which became the last day of school for the next 6 weeks, which became the last day of school until the next fall, which became the last day of school for my kids for the last 15 months. And, you know, all I could see was this woman mouth moving, but all the districts scrolling across the bottom along the ticker tape. Strange day. I felt a little confused and a lot excited, like, ooh, they get a 2-week spring break, how fun. But then, you know, plans started getting canceled. We didn't go anywhere. We sort of just hunkered down and stayed home. Spring break was canceled. Summer plans were canceled. We stayed pretty put. I was really thankful that the summer before we had the foresight to put in a pool, because that pool got really used over the last 15 months. But little did we know that we'd be here today. 3.7 million people would be dead worldwide. At first, I was like amazing at homeschooling. I did art with my kids. Here's some of it. Come on, there we go. We were doing art projects every week. We were doing science experiments in the kitchen. We were baking and making math out of baking. And then I was like, I'm a trained teacher. I did this for 14 years. I can do this at home. Yeah, that lasted for about 3 weeks. Weeks stretched into months, and suddenly, you know, we're just battling our kids to get 20 minutes of math done. It became contentious. One of my kids has gone back to school, and 2 of them are like happy as clams being virtual and don't really ever want to go back to school in person. So we'll see how that goes next fall. You know, the TEA, the Texas Education Association, they really were still focused on measurements and data and making sure kids were learning math and doing projects. And I really wish that they had taken a minute to go, we need to focus on mental health. We need to make sure our kids are all right, because this has been hard on the kids. And the idea of catching up to what is kind of a misnomer or a myth, it's like, who's setting the standard for how well we're doing right now? You know, because we've never been here before. As it is, there's over 40,000 kids, I believe in HIC alone, who never reported back to school. So we lost kids, you know, who lost parents, who lost family members, and that is a huge learning for me. In so many ways, our systems, our education systems, our health systems, our political systems are reactive rather than responsive or preventative. And I saw that a lot this year. One of the best things about the last 15 months was that Josh also got to work virtually for the most part, my husband. He is a director of college counseling at Audi, and he meets with families and kids mostly one-on-one, so he could do all of that by Zoom. So for the most part, we were managing these 3 crazy, lovely, they're still lovely, boys from home together, and that was really supportive. And as we all know, this time was a test for our relationships. You know, it really, it tested us. Some of our relationships that we maybe were used to seeing every week have sort of fallen away. Some of them have become stronger. I'm relieved to feel like Josh and I remain as good a team as ever and that we're solid, but I imagine we're going to see a slew of divorces and a slew of babies being born. Maybe not, those of us in this room I'm not having any more babies, but but there's a lot, you know, this was a test. But part of this process for us is due to the fact that in addition to COVID, there have been, of course, some really high-profile, intense killings that erupted us as in our nation, and dialogues about racial justice emerged in ways that, at least in my lifetime, probably in the 60s, it felt similar, but it hasn't happened to this degree in my lifetime. I'm lucky that I'm married to someone and that I'm friends with people who are not only thoughtful and passionate about these issues, but we grapple with them together. And with my person, with Josh, I feel so safe and held to go through this together, because we also had to hold our kids in these moments. So on top of that stress of COVID, of course, as I said, it's been really hard on the kids. I have one kid who is a little more anxious than the others, and he won't take off his mask even outside. And I'm like, baby, it's okay. You know, we're outside, we're good. I can't separate, though, the pandemic from the various social and economic disparities that became even clearer during this time. So it all feels very enmeshed for me. And already our attention to these issues is waning as language like, let's get back to normal becomes more prevalent. We sort of start to leave the difficult behind. So using words like unprecedented, as you said, to describe our social climate, I want to ask for whom? Because there are people of color, immigrants, LGBTQIA, those who live in poverty, or for whom inequities have been lifelong and even multi-generational. This is not unprecedented. So in this way, I'm glad my kids were home. We got to hold their questions and be with them. I don't feel like the schools addressed some of these questions adequately. One of my kids' teachers said to me, well, it's just really hard to talk about race. It is. And it's harder for adults than it is for kids. That's what I've learned. And kids want to just ask questions and have them answered honestly. They want to know what we think, and they are really good BS detectors. You know, they know when we're trying to like pretty up an answer. They know when we're trying to kind of make it go away. And they give you that look like your dog does, kind of like, you know, that doesn't make sense what you just said. Texas legislature just became one of a dozen. The states in orange and red are about to pass or have passed teaching around the impact of slavery and the role of racism in U.S. politics and history. It's part of, you know, we've said this in here before, it's in the air we breathe. This is just part of our history, is how has race established our social hierarchies, et cetera. So Texas is no longer allowing this dialogue in schools. And Texas, if you don't know this, is the producer and editor of textbooks for most of the country. So that means that most of the country is going to be impacted by this legislation. Texas is the editor and producer of textbooks for most of the country. So most of the country will be impacted by this legislation. Teachers who go rogue may continue to talk about it, but it's not going to be part of their sort of education. So having my kids at home has at least assured me that they are safe to ask questions, that they're not going to be thrown under the rug, and that they can experience the kind of wrestling instead of prizing comfort over discomfort.
So are you saying that children can't ask questions?
I don't know how it's going to look, to be honest with you. I know that it's not required to be taught. It's when we eliminate a certain truth about our history, we erase stories, right? So one of the things we've grappled with is how do we hold all these stories? How do we hold the stories of my ancestry that's been here since 1609 with Josh's ancestry in the same household? You know, those are just stories that we have to hold. So to be honest, for all of the reasons I just named, because these things feel so enmeshed to me, I'm in the category of people who have some anxiety about this idea of reopening or returning to normal. I'm still working through all the reasons why that is. In some ways, I think our bodies are habituated. You know, even as we see each other, we're like, do we hug? How close do I get? We're kind of used to this bubble around us. You know, we're habituated to be with very few people. And because so much has been politicized, from mask wearing to gun carrying to whether or not certain lives matter, or to whether or not even COVID is that big of a deal, we're not grappling with these things morally and spiritually. We're politicizing and making them more binary rather than complicated and fluid. So I hope that as we sort of regather, number one, I feel so honored and grateful to have spent this time, not just with Bill, but knowing that you all have stuck with us. I feel honored that we're in this space together. I feel grateful that we're in this space together. The live streams on Sunday have been the one thing that I know, well, today's Sunday. That's when I know what day of the week it is. So, you know, I think even as the world around us feels unsteady, I'm really happy to be here right now. with all of you.
Yeah. So we have picked this Sunday to introduce a new theme. And the title that we've given to this time today is Out Where the New Begins. And I have been made the designated title person.
That's because you love to come up with them.
I love titles.
Yeah.
And
I just go, okay.
after thinking of this title, I then thought of this Rumi poem that I love so much. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense. So during the shutdown, we began to encounter a lot of complications that were scary. And even without the virus, our lives are 100 times more complicated than they were, say, for my parents. Simpler times. So we stayed inside, and when we went out, we wore masks. Wayne Herbert made me a t-shirt, which I wore when I got both of my vaccine shots, and it has a coronavirus virus on it, a big hypodermic needle on it, and a gunshot wound in it. It says, I got shot. And I wore it both to both inoculations, and people want to take pictures of it. After the mass shooting in Colorado, I quit wearing it, but I think the fact that we took the precautions that we did, at least the epidemiologists that I read and trust, said that we avoided at least an additional 1 million other deaths by doing what we did, by staying in, masking, distancing, washing hands. And to see what a no mask, no restriction America could have been, take a look at Brazil, or take a look at India. What we have now on our hands, this being able to do this, is a near miracle. And we're beginning to go out, beginning to take our mask off in some places. In some places, it's a challenge. This person says, I forgot how much I miss seeing a movie with an audience I hate.
I was thinking about that as people were like undoing cookies. I was like, do we need a slide that says unwrap your packaged goods before the movie starts?
So last Friday, not this past Friday, but Friday a week ago, David Brooks had an article in the New York Times that I thought was just wonderful, in which he talked about some of the masks some people have put on in an effort to stay safe and protected. And he said we put them on out of fear. In the years before COVID, he wrote, quote, productivity is a mask. I'm too busy to see you. Essentialism is a mask. I can make all sorts of assumptions about you based on what racial or ethnic group you're a part of. Self-doubt is a mask. I don't show myself because I'm afraid you won't like me. Distrust is a mask. I wall myself in because I'm suspicious you'll hurt me. And Brooks suggests, and I'm going to join him, that as we take off the physical mask, we remove the psychological mask as well. And I'm certainly not suggesting we go back to normal. The normal we were practicing is what got us into COVID in the first place and led us to handle it as a nation in the way that we have. I'm thinking about how can we deepen our communal and moral lives. Now, in preparation for her being here in the fall, I have been reading Freeing Jesus. Rediscovering Jesus as Friend, Teacher, Savior, Lord, Way, and Presence by Diana Butler Bass. And in the next to last chapter, I'm almost through reading this book. In the next to last chapter, actually it's 3 chapters from the end, She talked about Jesus as the way. And she describes how she herself made the move from being a rigid, compliant, female, fundamentalist Christian to being the open, progressive person that she is today. And Diana Butler Bass' awareness is that fundamentalism, isolationism, certitude are all ways people have of creating the illusion of safety and control. So when it became clear to me, and this started with my encounter with Ilia Delio, and then with the reading of 3 essays, interviews by Michael Morwood, that evolutionary cosmology was the key to our future. I began to talk about the space in which we live as living between the no longer and the not yet, and that was the theme that I gave to Ordinary Life at that time. Now, of course, in a sense, that is true for the living of all of our days, even moments of our lives. One of the central tenets of Buddhism is that things arise and they fall away. Things arise and they fall away. That's why breathing meditation is so helpful. We are always living in between this breath and the next one, between yesterday and tomorrow, between pre-pandemic and post, between birth and death. But after these many months of being unable to gather in person, and now being able to do so, which is an event we have so longed for, we are introducing a new theme today, and we are calling it the way of paradox and contradiction. Wisdom teachings for the living of ordinary life. So we will begin this journey next Sunday talking about contradiction and paradox, and in the beginning we're going to talk a lot about it. All wise, useful spiritual teachings are full of such, just as our lives are full of paradox and contradiction. Mystery, the wisdom of unsayability. This is what makes spiritual life and living so dynamic, creative, and, I would add, nonviolent. One paradoxical truth is that faith needs to become more complex before it can become clear again. That's a paradox. Diana Butler Bass says in her book, the Jesus way is full of switchbacks, spirals, and unexpected turns. Mystery, paradox, unknowing, unsaying. Whenever you think you're near the center, the path suddenly veers in a different direction, and you find yourself again at the edge of the way. And the way is made by walking it. A quote that both Holly and I love from the writing of Sarah Grant, that alternative theology book that some of you during the pandemic sent an email and got a free copy of. If you didn't, send me another one and I will send it to you. You can have this book for free. It's not easy to read. Do you think?
Yes and no. She's very clear in her thinking, and it is, theology and philosophy a little bit.
So Sarah Grant is a Roman Catholic nun who left Scotland and went to India and became a Hindu.
Yeah.
You can do both.
Yeah.
You can be a Christian and a Hindu at the same time, and she did that. And one of the lines in the book that I just love is, the way is not the way because Jesus walked it. Jesus walked it because it's the way. So I'm going to use 2 icons that you're going to see every Sunday going forward to brand this new theme. One of them is the icon of the Pantocrator, which you are familiar with seeing. And this is the earliest depiction of Jesus that we have. It comes from 235. It's not in any way what people think Jesus actually looked like. This is an icon. Icons are used in the Greek church, in the Egyptian church, to get an understanding that you see through an icon. You see through an icon. And this icon, the face of Jesus, is different on either side. Non-duality. And the other icon that I'm going to use, and we're going to spend time talking about this, is actually not an icon, it's a painting. This is Rembrandt's painting of the Return of the Prodigal. I love this. This icon. This painting contains so much that is so spiritually evocative for our time. In it, there is a waking up, there's a returning, there's a lamenting, there's an accepting and healing love, there's the agony of ongoing judgment and separation that's presented by the elder brother. So much, and just yesterday, somebody sent me an email that said if you look closely in the upper left-hand corner of the painting, there's the feminine face. The original of this painting in Russia, I've got it hanging in my house where I see it every single day. I've never seen that.
You made it sound like you have the original hanging in your house.
I do.
Careful about announcing that. Some art thieves are going to come for that.
So Holly and I both are going to use other resources going forward, but I'm going to be primarily basing my teachings on the database of Jesus teachings that we have, and particularly on rereading the Gospel of John, the mystical Gospel of John. We'll be talking more about that as we go forth. I think most people have an image of Jesus that is so tame that it's boring. Jesus is a nice, quiet, gentle, kind of soft guy. Kids like to sit in his lap.
Like Santa Claus?
He walked around in flowing robes, pastel colors. They were always freshly laundered and pressed. He had a sheep in one arm and he was hailing a taxi with the other hand.
Oh, goodness.
But that's not the real story. I mean, the real story is full of paradox and contradiction. For example, on the one hand, Jesus says, "Come unto me, all you who are labor and heavy laden, I'll give you rest. Take what I'm teaching on. It's light, it's easy." And then on the other hand, he says, you know, the way I'm offering you is so difficult, it's going to cost you your life. I'm going to also be using insights from depth psychology, the wisdom insights from other living religious systems, especially those of First Nations people, drawing from Muraku's writings a lot. And we'll be using Hinduism and Buddhism that come into play. And of course, continuing to use the insights that come to us from evolutionary cosmology. I want you to hear things in here that you're not likely to hear other places. Things that will be true and things that will be useful for the living of ordinary life. Now, though I do seriously believe that the first step in taking religious journey, spiritual journey, is deconstructing. We got to get over that notion of Jesus as meek and mild kind of thing. I think this is true for all believers in all religions, that we start out at a very dualistic level and then we need to graduate from that, but we'll talk about that. But we also need to construct a path that we can walk, a path that bears those marks of things that you hear about and hear all the time: peace, love, joy, humility, and non-judgment. Those things, patience. So it can't be the same path that we used to get here. We've got to come to a time in our lives and lives together and as a faith community where if we don't see doors and windows through which to walk and through which to see, we're just going to have to walk through walls. Or, as I read somewhere years ago, when you come to the end of the road you are walking and cannot see the next step ahead, you must step off in faith, believing either that there will be something solid to stand on or that you will be taught to fly. I embrace both those.
Did we both buy a copy of the Book of Secrets, Meister Eckhart's?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lovely little...
I haven't started reading it.
Oh, I did. I sent you a text of a picture last night of something I read. This lovely book that is translations of or interpretations of Meister Eckhart, 12th, 13th century mystic. Really lovely meditation book, little kind of poems almost, that he was really a paradox teacher. You know, he was a mystic. He really taught about this sort of way of walking in contradiction in the both and the big and the small. So you left us on a flying note. Now I'm going to say, again, an estimated 3.7 million people died over the last 15 months. Sorry to bring it right back down. But this was kind of astounding to me. In many parts of the world, this number shows no signs of slowing, as you just mentioned about India and Brazil. In the 6 years during World War II, roughly 6 million Jews were exterminated by horrific means. Most of us know that number. That number is staggering, it's shocking, it's grotesque, it's hard to hold. Remembrances to those deaths have been erected all over the world, and Germany had to go through a process of kind of facing and reconciling the impact of Nazi rule on its society. It had to imagine a different way forward, and most of us remember when the Berlin Wall came down in the 80s and how, you know, it sort of became an integrated democracy again, but that took years. So the Holocaust was not normal, nor is accepting how much COVID has destroyed our population, nor is accepting racism and race-based violence, which the Holocaust was also based on. COVID and the way that our country has become polarized is not normal. I don't want to draw parallels necessarily between the exact circumstances of the Holocaust and COVID. They're not the same. The losses aren't the same. I'm trying to hold the numbers. We're halfway to 6 million in 1 year. And that is astounding to me. So 2 things are happening. Again, that number is almost impossible to hold. So it would be like in our country if the entire state of Oklahoma disappeared, or Houston might be, that went away. We'll get to her in a second. Or Houston would be nearly wiped out. We have a population of just over 4 million. And so we relate to these losses in numbers because we haven't done a sort of collective grieving. And as Bill said, I think we're going to be leaning into how we process this together, you know, as we move forward. We've normalized something that is abnormal, and because that grief, I think, sometimes threatens to overwhelm us, normalizing it is also a bit of a survival technique. Some of us know people, and multiple people, who have died over the last year. I do. The one that hit me the hardest was this young woman. She was a former student of mine, and she died at age 26. We thought that wasn't going to happen to young people. So there are names and faces like Brenda's who are not with us anymore. I want to find a way to commemorate that, to say there are losses, there are people maybe in this room that we don't know aren't here because of death. Viktor Frankl, you love him. I have read him for my dissertation work as well. He survived a concentration camp. He became a very well-known psychologist. And he writes about this normalizing the abnormal in man's search for meaning. He says, once the shock and fear and anger wore off of actually being in a concentration camp, prisoners very quickly normalize this ever-present death. So at first, while they might have mourned the losses, might have closed the eyes of the dead, or at least acknowledged, at some point they would just passively watch the dead being carried off or dragged off in some cases. And at some point, he says, they even began to pick through the clothes and the shoes of the dead to be able to have that string from their uniforms became a commodity that they could use to sew things back together. So he writes, an abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is normal behavior. In other words, it would be very difficult, he didn't write this, so this is someone else's interpretation, to react normally to some of the horrific results of the pandemic, the killing of George Floyd, and the January 6th riot. At some point, Frankl realized he was kind of losing some sense of humanity. He had this awakening, and he writes about it as he's going to a work site, that he was losing a sense of purpose and meaning. So right there, amidst all this death and human evil, he realized that he would have to make meaning of this experience in order to provide motivation for living. He never forgot the circumstances. We can't. We can't just forget circumstances that arrest our living in this way. But he could create something new from them, a new way of understanding. That new way of understanding created the way for logotherapy, which is a meaning-making therapy. You can speak far more eloquently about that, I'm sure. But if we lose meaning and purpose in our life, we cease to live, right? When we keep finding ourselves stuck, arrested by that meaninglessness, or scared of change, even as I admit, I'm scared of what we are doing going forward. Sometimes we can get stuck in a trauma loop, and one of my favorite psychologists, Bessel van der Kolk, writes that when we're in that loop, our imagination is hijacked. When we lose our ability to imagine a way forward, that's when we know we're kind of hijacked. And it's okay to be there. There is a way through that, too. And I think one of the questions we're asking ourselves is, how do we move in this? How do we move from being stuck? How do we move from how we're habituated? And this is where paradox comes in, because it helps us touch the edges of something that's impossible and unknowable. It makes it possible and knowable. On the same day that you recalled Rumi's poem, Out Beyond Ideas, I like how you say this poem found me. Mm-hmm. A poem by Paul Tran found me. Does anyone in here listen to On Being's podcast that is Poetry Unbound? So Pádraig Ó Tuama is an Irish Catholic poet and healer and space maker for resolving conflict, and he has a component of On Being that is that he reads poetry and explicates them. And that's become a little bit of I love poetry, I've said that a lot, a little bit of a daily practice for me. But this poem called The Cave is about seeing something through. So in many ways, entering that unavoidable darkness that is part of our human experience. I imagine we've all been through some darkness. And that is represented by the idea of the cave. The last line reads, "They followed the idea so far inside that outside was another idea." So we enter that cave, and in that cave, the secrets of the true self are hidden. That's a paradox, right? If we go deep within, we find something that we haven't seen before. And even though the cave is dark, embedded within is this ever-present light that shines without ceasing. Each and every one of us has that ever-present light. And sometimes we lose it. Sometimes we don't know how to find it. But there's no way to that light except for through the cave, through the darkest night. And so this is the journey of hope that we continue to go on together.
So
I didn't even show that picture.
there's the cave.
Yeah, there's our cave.
So long before COVID, years ago, out of a conversation that I was having with Matt Russell. Some of you remember Matt Russell? Used to be here? No? You remember Matt?
Of course, yeah.
I realized that I needed to have help in teaching ordinary life. So Matt and Holly and Brooke Summers Perry and I began to meet on a regular basis. It was an incredible, energetic time, creative and energetic time. And out of that grew Conspire, which used to follow Ordinary Life, a discussion group, meditation group that met after this class. And Matt and I even tried, since he was the preacher of the middle service, to put the middle service and Ordinary Life together, and that didn't work. Well, we tried. But over a long period of time, Brooke discerned that it was not something that she wanted to do, was to continue teaching in a space like this. So Brooke has her own ministry going on out there.
Doing really
very creative woman doing what she's doing. And as you know, Matt is no longer here. But Holly did agree to doing that. So it ended up that from time to time, Holly and I would co-teach together. We'd hit a rhythm about once a month. And so that you might remember, on February the 9th of 2020, Holly and I taught co-taught a class together called Coloring Outside the Lines using a full palette. You remember that?
Yes, I do.
And then on March the 15th, I asked her to come back. And that was the first. And the title of that class was, Can You Hear Me Now? The Art of Spiritual Dialogue. And the next Sunday shows you the anxiety that we were having about what we were doing, because we co-taught a class called How Not to Go Berserk When Things Fall Apart.
Yeah.
And I won't go into all this right now, but by then I had already had enough experience of speaking to an empty church and speaking to a camera by myself that I did not want to come here by myself and do that on a regular basis, so that I asked Holly if she would be willing to continue to co-teach with me. Now I want you to be clear. This woman has 3 pre-teenage male children.
Maybe we should get them to come
And
teach.
she can go on and hear about how she's a good teacher, which she is, and how she loves them and all that, which she does. But I see the dark side too. There have been times when she could kill her kids, and I would certainly understand. She is also working on her PhD in evolutionary cosmology. She's involved in a number of social justice causes. And further, she has done this work for the last 15 months for no remuneration whatsoever.
I got a raise every week.
It is a debt I cannot repay. And I'm so grateful.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I have asked her if she will continue in the same role. We haven't figured out the rhythm yet.
Yeah, we'll get there.
But it has become clear to me in the last 15 months that I need to practice what I preach. And that is, if I say that one of the dark shadow archetypes that grips us, certainly as a religious institution and as a country, is the white male patriarch archetype, then as an 84-year-old white guy, I need to get out of the way occasionally
You're not
and
quite
let the
84.
feminine speak.
You're
And
only
that's-
almost 84.
Well, 84.
And I just gave you a philosopher's stone.
I'll be young forever.
Yeah. It's in his
Won't die.
pocket.
So Holly brings a demographic and perspective that I don't. And so the rhythm is that some Sundays we're going to co-teach. Some Sundays I want to teach by myself. Some Sundays Holly's going to teach by herself. Some Sundays we will have somebody else here. Like in 2 weeks, I'm going to dialogue with Dr. Jim Bankston about the future of the Methodist Church and among other things. So I think you will be interested in that. And in the past, Ordinary Life has not been very interactive, and I would like for that to be different. So if you feel a call to community, I would like for you to stand up, not today, because we're running out of time, but if you feel a call to community during the announcement time or sometime, I'd like for you to stand up and make it known. Book group, dinner club, study group, discussion group after class, whatever that you would like to do, I would like for you to do that. If you feel a call to commitment, a missional call. Diane Shinke, who is not here today, once stood up in this class and said, I'm doing a discussion group on the Reclaiming Jesus document. And we met every week on Tuesday nights to deal with that. So if you feel something like that, I'm going to issue the first one. Richard Orr will have his last Conspire conference coming up this next year.
His last one?
His last one. It's not going to be in person. It's going to be webinar. And I'd like to figure out a way to sponsor that event for the Ordinary Life in St. Paul's group, so that we have it here and do it. I'll take responsibility for getting that figured out. So,
Which means we're going to ask Tim how to make it possible.
Huh?
Which means we're going to ask Tim how to make it possible.
Well, yeah.
And Richard.
John Watson, Olivia Watson,
Yeah.
William Budge, Richard Wingfield, Tim Leatherwood. These are the people who've kept us going.
Yeah.
And so thank them
Yeah.
when you see them. Well, our future is a paradox. It is certain, however brief. It's also unknown. And it's a mystery what path we'll take. There's signs pointing us along the way.
Do you know you're reading from my script?
Huh?
Just keep going. You're me right now.
I am?
Yeah, you got this.
Take over.
He really wants to be a woman. Just kidding. I'll say what feels really good is hearing laughter. We've just had to laugh at each other the last couple of months.
I wasn't aware. I teach class on awareness. Did you know that?
I wasn't aware of that. No. We got to rush through these last few minutes, but we can call, if we've been here for a while, we can remember times when Bill's teaching has pivoted. I want to say that framing this year with this man has been a gift. I might weep. I appreciate you so much.
Vice versa.
Yeah. If you go back to the archives, you'll notice that one of those pivots was 9/11. Right? And another was Ilia Delio. We're in another pivot. This time requires of us a kind of stopping and sitting and turning toward. So here we are. We are in the midst of change triggered by the events of the last 15 months, the global standstill of COVID, the exposure on a wide scale of systemic racism and economic inequity. And all of Bill's teachings, in my humble opinion, strive to mirror Jesus' own, which in turn mirror the way of wisdom and compassion. And that points us toward, I think, becoming better humans. Like, we're just all grappling to become better versions of ourselves here. Many of us have found this a home in ordinary life. For me, it's been my church for the last 20 years, I think. A place where we feel seen and challenged. I've been part of its past, I'm part of its present, and I'm honored to be part of its future. And I don't take that lightly. I'm still here, I think, because at this point I consider myself a serious student of love, the greatest paradox of all. I'm reading this little book by Houston's own Pittman McGehee. I don't know if he's originally from Houston, but he was here at Christ Church Cathedral for so long.
He's now living in Austin.
Yeah, he lives in Austin. He teaches at a seminary and does lots of speeches around town. But anyways, I'm reading this little book, The Paradox of Love, and it's easy to read. It's about 100 pages and just walks through the sort of concepts of love. I'll get into it more as we move forward. But I love this idea, and this one is probably, to me, the greatest one to sit with as we think about what it means to be love. It's that we can only know ourselves as love within community. That's a paradox. I alone become myself. I cannot become myself alone. So to be in this loving, empowered, and liberatory community seeks to be a container that loves all of the individuals in it into becoming the truest, best version of ourselves. And that's what I'm looking forward to with us. Occasionally, Bill gets tired of the graphics on our website. Do y'all remember this one? That was the first, maybe, that Stephanie Warfield did. Mm-hmm. And he says, can we redo the graphics? Can we just put new pictures up? So we talk, and then I text a lot with Richard. Do you like this one or that one? Do you have any photos we can use? And we redo the graphics. So this week, as we've been kind of refining a new logo, I came across this one, which says, inhabiting the kingdom within. Still so relevant. It's our greatest spiritual work. The work, I think, of our lifetime is to inhabit that light within. It's cyclical. It's ongoing, and it's often destabilizing, maybe signified by this new graphic of the person on the unicycle. We're so small amidst these grand cosmic immensities, and yet we can know it so intimately. Finish up, sir. Your turn.
See, I think that neither one of us can teach you anything you don't already know. I believe each one of you knows in your heart of hearts what needs to happen for us to have a better life and a better world. We know. And you also know that walking the path of paradox and contradiction isn't easy. It's exhilarating. It's terrifying. It's life-giving. I think of a saying that I got from Mary Oliver, breathe it all in, love it all out. You know, the dominant framing story of our culture, and I got to show you this next slide. I know we're running a little late, but somebody sent me this week, and I could not believe it. But it's the dominant framing story of our culture is consumerism. These are the three causes made out of cases of Mr. Pibb.
Dr. Pepper, Mr. Pibb. Do they make Mr. Pibb anymore?
I think so.
They do.
A little girl spontaneously kneeling in prayer before it.
Yeah.
This is the dominant dualistic message that's in our culture. And spiritual life and spiritual living, following the way of Jesus, cannot follow this path, and we know that. So the way of paradox and contradiction will give us a new path to walk. There's a Zen teaching that I like that says, as I am, the world becomes. The way we are shaped is the way we shape the world. And we put faith in that and have confidence in that. So I hope you're up for the way of paradox and contradiction. We don't know what's next, but we live in this dualistic culture, and for some reason we keep electing people who really believe in it. It's even puzzling. But as we're both saying, we have to go deep within the mystery of what is, and we make this journey, as Holly said, with no light and with light. And we feel our way along, and we have a guide. Paradox and contradiction. Jesus is always saying, come on, let's go. Let's go to the next country. Come on, get in the boat. Let's go across the lake. Let's cross the boundary. Let's go to some other place. And I know there are lots of boundaries and barriers, but I'm saying, come on, let's go. Paradox and contradiction. No matter where you go this week, no matter what happens, remember this, you carry precious cargo, so watch your step, and we will see you here next week.